If you're part of Victory Baptist Church, you probably noticed over the last several weeks that one of the things that I do is that a lot of times I preach a message and then I have a Bible study on that message and sort of elaborate on the message that we talked about that week. Also, sometimes I'll actually even start with the Bible study and then preach the message on Sunday morning, kind of once again trying to reiterate in our hearts what God has given me that week and what he's trying to teach us that week. Because I believe that every time that God gives me a message or God gives me something he wants me to share, I don't think it's just that share that one time. It's for us to apply to our lives. It's sort of like that guy, that preacher who had preached a sermon, and then the next week he preached the same exact sermon. And as he was standing at the door, people were coming out. One of the deacons grabbed him by the hand and said, "Preacher, you preached that exact sermon last week." And the preacher replied, "Well, when you start doing that one, then I'll move on to something else." And sometimes I think that God gives us a message and he wants us to take that message to heart, not just look around and go, well, that applies to the guy next to me, or I wish old so and so would have been here to hear this message. A lot of times God gives it to us. Even messages on the gospel, even if you're a child of God, even if you're saved, that message is for you because it reminds us we're great forgetters, man. We forget our blessings so oftentimes, and we need to be constantly reminded of the gospel of what Jesus did for us, and that grace and mercy that comes to us through the cross of Christ, man. We don't we didn't do anything to deserve it. It was given to us. There is a series, and I don't promote series a lot of times or shows on Netflix. I know that some people have had problems with that Netflix over the last couple of months with some of the programming they have on there. But if you do happen to have it, there is a program called The American Gospel. If you get a chance, man, you need to watch that program. It, to me, encapsulates what I truly believe uh, and what we really need to emphasize and focus, which is in Christ alone I place my trust. Because we place it in ourselves, we're in trouble. Because when we begin to place it in ourselves, then what we're doing is we're kind of thinking that God may be some kind of scorekeeper in the sky. And as long as we're doing good deeds, then our salvation is great. We got it. But the moment we fail, then we've lost it. And I'm so glad and I'm so thankful that I don't have to place my trust in me because I fail too often and I fall too often. But I place my trust in Christ alone. And it used to kind of bother me when I was younger and I read the bumper sticker, Christians are not perfect, just forgiven. But in actuality, that's so true. We're not perfect and we are just forgiven. And it used to bother me because I thought, well, you're kind of saying, well, then sin's okay, right? We can just be forgiven. But in actuality, sin's not okay, but we can be forgiven. And no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, no matter how many times you've done it, God can forgive you. Does that mean that I'm giving you a cheap grace? That I'm giving you an easy gospel? That, yeah, you can go out and sin as much as you want to? Folks, if Christ comes into your heart and Christ comes into your life, you sin as much as you want to, sin more than you want to, because Christ changes your want to, and he changes you from the inside out. And instead of running towards sin, you begin to run away from it. Does that mean that we never fall, that we never stumble, that we never choose sin? Of course we do. But what that means is that, man, we ought to be striving not to. We ought to be striving to please God, not because if we please him, then we'll get into heaven. But we try to please God because we want to please him. Just like any son wants to please his father, and he does. I don't care. As a little kid, you wanted to please your mom and dad. If you had a mom and dad, if you didn't, you had a guardian. You wanted to please the adults. And so we should be like that because God first loved us. We want to love him with our lifestyle. Now, switching gears back to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is right around the middle of the Bible. It's written by Solomon, who is the son of David. And I want to read and just kind of kick us off here. And we're going to go through several passages in Ecclesiastes. But I want to kick us off with Ecclesiastes 1, 16 through 18. And I could easily kick you off with the whole first chapter because the whole first chapter is very pessimistic. It's dark. And what it says is this in 16 through 18 of Ecclesiastes 1. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also to madness and folly. But I learned this, it is chasing after wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Now, he's basically saying here, I've done it all. Okay, I have sought wisdom, I have sought knowledge, I have actually went the other extreme, and I've just lived in debauchery, and I've lived in excess, and I've lived in hedonism. I've done absolutely all of it, and I have found that whether I was trying to live right and be self-righteous, or whether I was just living in pleasure and hedonism, that either way, it was chasing after the wind. It did not satisfy. If I were to ask you tonight, what is it that we're looking for? What is it that we're all looking for that seems so elusive to us? You know, I think most of us would say that one of the goals of our life is to be happy. You know, and I hear people say that all the time. I don't really care if I'm rich or whatever, as long as I'm happy. You know, as long as I can be happy. But, you know, I've seen rich people, poor people, and neither one of them have happiness, right? It's almost like we're pursuing it. We have this thing that we're trying to get, and we just can't seem to grasp it. We're always looking for it. We think, well, maybe we'll soon get it, right? Right? It's as though it's just around the corner. You know, as a kid, we thought, well, when I graduate high school, then I'll have it. Or when I get through this college course and I graduate college, then I'll have it. Or when I get that job, when I finally get that job that I worked so hard to get, then I'll have it. Or when I find someone who loves me and who I love, the right guy or the right girl, then I'll have arrived. I will achieve what I want. I'll have what I need. I'll be satisfied. But yet we're not satisfied. Well, when I get married and when I have a baby, then I'll be satisfied. And yet we get married and we have babies and we're still not satisfied. Well, I need that house. That's my problem. I'm tired of paying money to rent. And when I get this nice house or I get this nice car or I get that promotion or I get where I want to be in life, then I'm going to achieve it. And then you arrive at that place and you get it, but you don't get it. It's like it's still not there. It's still something missing in our lives. We never truly arrive. You know, I remember years ago when I was just a boy, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years old, I was sitting outside with my cousin and we were talking as kids and we were dreaming about the future. What do we want to be when we grew up? You know, what do we want to do? What would we like to have in our lives? And I can remember us talking about that and saying, man, you know, right now we're just so young. You know, my mom and dad, they don't let us stay up late. We can't do what we want to do. But boy, when we turn 13, it's going to be different. You know, when we turn 13, we become teenagers. Then we'll be able to stay up past 9 o'clock. You know, I mean, we'll have it then when we stay up and we can, you know, watch TV, you know, watch some of the shows that our parents won't let us watch now. Well, we can do that when we turn 13. And then we turn 13 and then we're like, well, when I turn 16. And when I turn 16, then I will have arrived because then I'll have my car, a driver's license, be able to go where I want to go, do it on, be able to date, man. When I'm 16, then I will have it. But then you turn 16, you go, well, man, when I turn 18, you know, I'm not an adult yet. They still look at me as a kid. But when I turn 18, I'll be an adult. I'll be able to graduate high school. I'll be able to go to college or get out on my own. When I turn 18, then I will have arrived. I'll have it. I'll have what I'm looking for. But you turn 18 and you can't do it. And then you go, well, when I turn 21, you know, then I'll be an adult and the society will recognize me as an adult. I'll have graduated college or I'll be into a career and then I'll have it when I turn 21. Well, you turn 21, you go, well, man, I still haven't got it yet, but that's because I'm not married and I don't have a house and I don't have a career and I got to have kids. Then you get those things. You know, when I turn 30, then I'll have it. But then you turn 30 and you still don't have it. So you go, well, when I turn 40, you know, right now everybody looks at me as a kid still here where I work. And, you know, I haven't moved up the ladder yet. And so I need to establish my career more where people will respect me. And then when I turn 40, then I'll have it, right? When I turn 40, then you turn 40 and you wish you were 12 again. Because it's never really there. When are we going to finally arrive? When are we going to finally have it? When are we going to have the things that we're looking for? When are we going to finally find it? Now, Paul David Hewson was an Irish singer. He was a great singer, great songwriter, philanthropist, activist, venture capitalist, businessman, and he was an actor. He was a multimillionaire. possibly a billionaire, world famous. Everybody knew Paul David Hewson. Well, you may not know him by Paul David Hewson, but you know him by his stage name, Bono. Bono was the lead singer in the band YouTube. U2, I'm sorry, not YouTube, U2. And U2's popularity in 1987 was off the charts, man. They were hitting top record after top record, top album. And during that time, at the apex of his career, Bono wrote a song that still to this day speaks to so many people because it talks about the heart. And in that song, he says, I've climbed the highest mountain. I have run through the fields. I have run, I've crawled, I've scaled the city walls. I've kissed honey lips, felt the healing in their fingertips. It burned like fire, this burning desire. I've spoke with the tongues of angels. I've held the hand of the devil. It was warm in the night, and yet I was cold as a stone. But I still haven't found what I'm looking for. That was what Solomon was saying. I still haven't got it. I've done all these things, but I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And I think that's the reason many people turn to drugs and turn to alcohol and turn to affairs and turn to pornography and turn to so many things is because they're trying to numb out on life because life is disappointing, man. I mean, it's every elusive. It is by its very nature pessimistic. Guess what? Life's not going to end well. No matter what we do, no matter how great we live or how bad we live, it's not going to end well. It's always going to get worse. You know, it's like the second law of thermodynamics. You know, it's always winding down, man. Things that are new rust. They get old. And it's like with us, you know, there may be that shine of excitement there for that moment, but then it's quickly gone. And it's like we thought we had it, but it escapes through our fingertips. Solomon was looking for it. He was looking for it. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 2, verse 11, he says, then I looked at all my hands had done, and the labor I had spent in doing it. And behold, it was all vanity. It was chasing after the wind and a feeding on it. And there was no profit under the sun. In other words, I was not gaining anything. I thought I was gaining things, and I wasn't. It was always like trying to hold the wind, catch the wind. I was constantly chasing something that I could never grasp. I could never hold. The book of Ecclesiastes uses the term chasing after the wind at least 7 times. Ecclesiastes 1:4 speaks of chasing after the wind as it relates to the whole theme of the book. I've seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Now, who was Solomon, the writer of Ecclesiastes? Solomon was King David's son. He was a rich and powerful king that inherited all these things. In the heyday of the day of Israel, the kingdom was at its peak of power and peak of prosperity. Peace ruled the land. All the kings before Solomon, Saul and David, man, they were constantly fighting wars. They were constantly going to war. Not Solomon. He had peace and prosperity. He had all the riches that his fathers had gained before him. And Solomon now is an old man. As a young man, he's strong, he's good looking, he's rich, he's powerful, and he's still rich and powerful at the end of his age, but he's looking back over his life. This man who had one time been chosen by God from infancy to be the king after his father David. Solomon had everything he could need in this world. Anything the world offered, Solomon had. He had power, he had position, he had prosperity, and he had great knowledge. All the gifts from God who loved him. Yet despite all these things, something was missing. He still didn't have it. Solomon had looked for it in all kinds of different places. He looked for it in power. He was the most powerful person in the land at that day. He was like the president of the United States. He was the leader of a superpower in those days. People did not go to war with him because of his power. They were afraid to go to war with him. And in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 22 through 27, it talks about Solomon. And it says Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores. I don't know what a core is, but whatever it is, it must be a lot. 30 cores of the finest flours and 60 cores of meal. 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. For he ruled all the kingdoms west of the Euphrates River. And it goes on to say in 26, verse 26, Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. The district governors, each in his month, supplied provisions for King Solomon and all who came to King Solomon's table. They saw to it that nothing was lacking. They also brought to the proper place their quotas of barley and straw for the chariot horses and for the other horses. Solomon lacked nothing. The Bible said he had excess, more than he could ever even imagine. He had it right there at the snap of his fingers. All he had to do was ask for it, and it would come. Now, in in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 32 through 34, not only did Solomon have all the power of any person in the world at that time, he had all the popularity. Man, he was famous, world famous. 1 Kings 4, verse 32 through 34 says, he spoke about 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. In other words, he was a great songwriter. People loved his music. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the walls. He spoke about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. The Bible tells us that Solomon was a very well-educated, world-educated man. So he could speak about so many things. He had so much knowledge. He knew about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. And then in verse 34 of 1 Kings chapter 4, it says, from all the nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. So people came from all over the world, even the Queen of Sheba, who I think eventually probably became one of Solomon's wives. He met her because she came to just seek him out. He was so famous throughout the world. In the day where there was no social media, there was no Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and yet he was world famous. People knew his name. Still, even though he had all this power, even though he had all this popularity and fame, it still eluded him. It was still like chasing after the wind. He said he still couldn't grasp it. So, because he had all this power and all this popularity, then of course, prosperity and possessions would follow after that. And so Solomon was rich beyond measure, and he had so many things. I mean, don't we often think that, the reason we're so down, the reason we haven't got it is because, if we could just get that new car, or if we could just get more money, maybe if we could just win the lottery, then we would finally be happy once we had all the money that we needed. But that's not true. Even those who win the lottery, about half of those lose their entire fortune. That's almost 50%. 1 out of 2 lose every bit that they ever gain. About 70% of the people who win the lottery, 70%, 7 out of 10, end up broke shortly after. Most lottery winners report unwarranted pressure to support others after they win that new money. Well, we could definitely see that. You got cousins coming out of the woodwork when you win the lottery, right? Everybody with their hand out. You're much more likely to be robbed or scammed or murdered, even murdered. You can Google the cases of people who had their children kidnapped or murdered after they won the lottery. You become a target for lawsuits. Anybody prosperous is a target for lawsuits. You lose friends. Your family fights over your money. It divides families. The majority of lottery winners experience deep depression after the shine, the newness wears off. And oftentimes it leads to infidelity and divorce. Well, you can see that. I mean, all of a sudden there's this, chubby, balding guy, he wins the lottery, becomes a multimillionaire. All of a sudden the women love him, right? Why? Because he's got the money. They want to scam him out of his money. They want to manipulate him for his finances. We see that all the time with actors that are not all that attractive suddenly marrying supermodels that are 25 years younger than they are. Why? Because they're being scammed, right? They're being used. Well, even having a lot of money and possessions does not mean that you're going to be happy. As a matter of fact, it could bring more misery than it's worth. Here's what Solomon said about his money and about his riches. In Ecclesiastes 2, verse 4 through 9, Solomon says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs of water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became far greater than anyone in Jerusalem before me. And what he means by that is, man, I was great, dude. As far as the world looking at me, I had everything. I had this beautiful, beautiful plantation. Man, I had all these trees and all these fruit trees. I had all these ponds and all these streams running through it. I had people who served me in the house and out the house. I had people peeling my grapes, I had anything I wanted. I simply would just have to say the word and it would be brought to me. I had so much money, there was no way I could spend it in my lifetime. And he says, not only that, man, I had women everywhere. I had parties, women, singers. It was always a party at my house, man. I had everything that you would think would delight a man's heart. I was great. It looked like from the outside, everything was great. But I still didn't find what I was looking for. There was still something missing. I didn't have it. You see, the problem with prosperity and wealth is that it creates inside of us an appetite for more. Have you ever seen a rich person give it all away? Not very often. What you do is you find the more money you make, the more you want to make, isn't it? Also, you find a lot of times, like in professional athletics, these guys become millionaires overnight, right? And what happens is a lot of times it creates in them an appetite for more. They just want more and more, the next big contract. Because we end up spending as much as we make, we end up needing more, or just wanting more. The desire to have the most money in the world drives some of the richest men in the world. They don't want to be, they don't want to just be wealthy. They want to be the wealthiest man in the world. And they're driven by that. That's their goal. The first million, they thought, I'm sure at one time, man, when I make my first million, I'm going to be happy. But it's not. Well, maybe when I make my first billion, I'll be happy. But it still doesn't satisfy, does it? And you can see it. What Solomon's saying is so true. You can see it. It always eludes you. It always creates in us an appetite for more and more and more. Solomon had everything a man could want, but he says it's like chasing after the wind. I still have not arrived. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I still haven't found it. And so Solomon then looked for it in pleasure. He said, okay, I'm powerful, I'm prosperous, I'm popular. Maybe I'll look for it in pleasure. And here's what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 2:11 through 10. He said, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Think about that. Man, if there was a new drug, I was taking it, man. If there was a new woman, I was seducing her. I denied my eyes and my heart absolutely nothing. He says, my heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all the things that my hand had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. The Bible says in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 3, talking about Solomon, it said that Solomon had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Now, what's a concubine? A concubine is a woman that you just keep. It's a kept woman, a mistress, right? And in those days, you could have as many wives you wanted, and you could have as many mistresses as you wanted. So Solomon took full advantage, and he had 700 of those. 700 wives, 300 concubines. Man, that is, or 300 mistresses. That is 1,000 women. 1,000 women. And you think you were a stud muffin. Solomon had 1,000 women. Any one of those women he could have whenever he wanted to have. Any kind of way he wanted to have it. And so you total that up for a minute, man. 1,000 women. If you had 1,000 women at your beck and call, and you would have one. Now you're pretty much a stud muffin if you can do one a day. But you got one woman a day, 365 days a year. It's only 365 days in a year. So Solomon was with one woman a day for 365 days. It would be 2.7 years before he had to come back to the next woman. So he could have a different woman every day for nearly 3 years. 3 years. So if you saw one wife, you say, okay, you saw a wife today, let's say 2020. I'll see you in October, maybe 2023. We'll set a date. We'll go out to dinner. How's that? So Solomon had all these women. He had all the pleasure, anything that he wanted, anything that he saw. He said, I took it. I had it, man. But still hadn't found what I'm looking for. It was chasing after the wind. Nothing satisfied. You know, isn't that true? Isn't that true with whether whether it's sex or whether it's drugs or whether it's alcohol? You know, especially for addicts, it's like you start off and it's still not enough, man. You're always chasing that first high. You never get it. You never quite get it back again. It's always eluding you. It's always like chasing after that wind. You can never have it back again. Solomon finally summed up his search for it. And he summed it up in Ecclesiastes 2, verse 17 through 21. He says, listen to this. If you have your Bibles, read it with me. Ecclesiastes 2, 17 through 21. He has all this popularity, all this pleasure, all this power. He has all this prosperity. And he says in Ecclesiastes 2, verse 17 through 21, so I hated life. Wow. I hated life. Nothing pleased me anymore. There was no pleasure. He says, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. In other words, everything became a burden, man. It became a burden to go see this wife. Everything was a burden. There was nothing anymore that was fulfilling to me at all. It was emptiness, vanity, chasing after the wind. He says this. He says, all of it was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. He says in verse 18, I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to one who comes after me. He's like, man, I've worked all my life for all this stuff, and guess what? Somebody else is going to enjoy it. I'm going to give it to his son. Who's probably going to spend it on something crazy anyway. I've got much more than I can ever have anyway. You know, I remember one time in my life, I lost everything, literally. I mean, literally, like lost everything. And I lived in a camper. And the only benefit I could see of living in that camper for 2 years was I didn't have to cut grass. You know, I didn't have to clean a house. I didn't have to go trim hedges. I didn't have to fix a roof in a house, you know. All these things that I had, man, just created in me an appetite for more. And you know what I was doing? It's like when I had my house, I was like building barns and building sheds and trying to find a place to store stuff. Why? Because I had so much stuff. I didn't know where to put all the stuff. So I had to build more sheds to store more stuff. And that became my life. It's like constant in repair of a new shed or building a new shed or building constant. The house was constantly needing repair. That's what he's like, man, all this stuff became grievous to me. It wasn't a pleasure. It was a burden now. And in verse 19, he says, and who knows whether the person will be wise or foolish, yet they have control over all the fruit of my toil, which I poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair under my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave it to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. He says, everything that I've acquired and everything I gained, I realize I'm getting older. What's it really going to matter in the long run, man? I'm just going to leave it to somebody else who don't even care about these things, you know? I got this nice car. In his case, it was a Camel maybe. But I got this nice, 1972 Corvette, man. I shine that thing up. I keep it in great running condition. I take good care of that thing. Man, I'm going to give it to my son who's going to go out and wreck it as soon as I give it to him, because he doesn't appreciate it. And he says all of these things, as I'm thinking this, it just becomes meaningless to me. It becomes meaningless. Solomon begins the book of Ecclesiastes with these words. If you went back to the very first chapter, the very first book, Solomon says this. He says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. everything is meaningless. What's he saying here? He's saying, I'm wealthy, I'm smart, I'm powerful, I was sexy, I was seductive, and yet I'm empty. I've been given everything a man could possibly ever want in the world, and yet I'm empty inside. And we see that over and over again in the 21st century, don't we? It's never enough, man. I don't care. It's never enough. Actors, rock stars, politicians chasing after the wind, killing themselves, drinking themselves to death, drugging themselves to death because they cannot find meaning or satisfaction. I'm sure they're thinking, well, once I get here, then I will have arrived. Once I get here, then I will finally have it. But once they arrive there, it's not there. Instead, they find emptiness and vanity, chasing after the wind. Solomon, as I said, is now an old man. He's looking back over his life. He's writing this final book. He's written all these songs. He's written all these proverbs. It's in the Bible. And now he's writing his epitaph. He's writing his benediction. And he's saying, look, man, here's what I've tried. I've tried power. I've tried popularity. I've tried pleasure. I've tried prosperity. And I've tried possessions. And it's not there. There is no satisfaction there. And he's saying, I want to be your teacher. I want to be your teacher. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Everything that I've done has been chasing after the wind. And so I want to be your teacher. You know, I don't have to try absolutely everything in the world to know that that's not going to satisfy me. Many of you out there have never really gotten drunk. Well, you don't have to try it to know that it's not a great thing once you get there, right? You don't have to try methamphetamine to realize that, you know what, that's not good for me. You don't have to try cigarettes to know I probably don't need to smoke. I mean, after all, what's the great benefit of it, right? There's a lot of things that we don't have to try because we can look at the experiences of others and go, that guy with lung cancer, that didn't turn out well for him, did it? That addict over there who's in rehab now, that alcohol and those drugs didn't turn out well for them, did it? In other words, what I can do is I can look at their experience and I can learn from that. I don't have to experience everything. You know, people say a lot of times experience is the best teacher. Unfortunately, experience sometimes cost us too high of a tuition. We have too high of a price to pay for that experience. Many times we need to learn from the experiences of others. And that's what Solomon's saying. He said, let me be your teacher. I'm your teacher. And I want you to listen to me. And I want you to listen to me very closely. I've tried all these things. And every bit of it is meaningless. All of it is vanity. All of it is emptiness. And all of it is trying to chase after the wind, trying to grasp the wind, trying to rope a tornado. You can't get it. It's always elusive. It always slips out of our grasp. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. It leaks out and it leaves you empty. And so Solomon now comes to the end of the book. He comes to the end of Ecclesiastes in Ecclesiastes 12. And I want you to turn over with me to there. Ecclesiastes 12. Solomon sums up the journey. And he says in verse 13 and 14 of Ecclesiastes 12, now all has been heard. And here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, every hidden thing, whether it's good or whether it's evil. What's he saying? First of all, he's saying this. As I come to the conclusion of the matter, as I have chased after the wind, as I have tried all of these things, this is the only thing that really matters. First of all, fear God. Fear God. What does fear God mean? It doesn't mean you shiver in fear and you're afraid of him. What that means is that word actually means respect. Respect God. Realize that life is meaningless without a hereafter. That what we do on this lifetime, it's not going to matter much. You need to respect God. You need to truly think about it and realize that, man, you know, everything that I do, whether it's good or whether it's evil, God's going to judge that. Now, what does he mean by that? I think what he means by that is I'm going to reap what I sow. That anytime I do a good deed, trust me, one day it's going to come back to me. And anytime I choose to do what is wrong, when I'm not following the commands of God, then what's going to happen? I'm going to reap what I sow. It's never going to end well. It's just a matter of time. Now it's not, when I reap what I sow, that doesn't mean that if I plant corn tomorrow, that I'm going to reap corn the next day. What that means is I may plant that corn, man. It may take rain and sun. It may take months and months to reap what I've sown. In our case, it may take years to reap what we've sown. Remember those times we crossed those boundaries and we did things that we knew were against what God wanted us to do, and we thought, I think I got away with that, right? Ecclesiastes says, well, God's going to judge it. Even if it's hidden, it's going to come back and bite you. Trust me, even if your wife don't find out, even if your husband don't find out, even if your mama don't find out, even if your daddy don't find out, you've lost a part of yourself that you can never have again, and you're going to one day reap what you've sown. It's going to come back and get you. No matter whether you think you got away with it or not, it's going to come back and get you. So Solomon says there's only two things that we need to remember, and that is to respect God and try to do what God says. Just try to do the next right thing. Are we always going to do that? No. Are we sometimes going to fail? Yes. And every time we fail, we're going to reap what we sow. God's not going to stop the sowing and reaping universal law. It's going to happen in some shape, form, or fashion. We will pay the price for disobeying God. On the other hand, when we are keeping the commands of God and we're trying to do what God says, we have to remember that God's going to bring to us the benefits of that. And the benefits of doing the next right thing with God is that you begin to find what Solomon had not found, and that is peace. You see, Solomon, he had all these other things, right? He had power, and he had popularity, and he had prosperity, and he had a pleasure. But the one thing Solomon didn't have is Solomon did not have peace. Why? The other things were just merely striving after wind. They were meaningless. They did not matter. They had no eternal matter to them. Everything that he tried was temporal. Everything that he tried was earthly. And God has created inside of you a void that only he can fill. The only way you can find peace is to follow God. That's the only way. In recovery programs such as AA and NA, you don't find peace until you find surrender, until you finally submit yourself to trying to do what God's called you to do. Doesn't mean that those who get in recovery always are perfect in every thought, feeling, and action. But what it does mean that the moment that I'm trying to do the next right thing, there will be peace in my life. And the day that I quit trying to do the next right thing, there's going to be turmoil in my life. And that turmoil is what's going to cause me to go out and use again, because I don't know how to deal well with turmoil. I don't know how to deal well with life on life's terms. And so if I want to have the peace of God, then I'm going to have to try to do the things that God tells me to do to have that peace. And God gives us that roadmap, doesn't he? Every single one of us here has a Bible or access to a Bible. We know what God says. We know the right thing for the most part. I don't even have to ask you usually what's the right thing. You pretty much know that's just right and that's just wrong. Now, we can warp our conscience, and I see people all the time with their consciences warped. I had a lady the other day arguing with me that abortion was okay. It's like, what? I don't know how you come up with that, how you come up with taking the innocent life as being okay. I mean, do I understand why women choose that? Well, yeah, I can understand that because it's an inconvenience. I can understand why men coerce women to do that because they don't want to be bogged down with child support all their life. So do I see what the benefit is of doing that? Yes. But is it morally and ethically right? I don't see how you think that way. And I don't see how you could possibly think that way. And I don't care. I mean, to me, it's not right. And so no matter what justification or rationalization or excuses you might come up with, and you can come up with many, I can come up with a whole lot of why I do what I do. But the fact is, just because I can justify something doesn't make that something right. I think that most of us know down deep in our hearts, though, what's right and what's wrong. God has given us a consciousness that's we shared it beyond the point that it's worthless. But for the most part, we haven't. And so maybe inside of us, God has created an emptiness and a void that only He can fill, and it can only be filled when we are doing the right things. And I think to do the right things, we have to understand something. I think we have to understand that you're not created for this world anyway. In other words, the things of this world is never going to give you the satisfaction that you're craving. It's never going to give you the desires of your heart. It's not. Not even church. I hate to say that, but it's not. You know, you can go to church every single night, man. You can be the best mom and dad you can ever be. You can be the best worker you can ever be. You can be a good person in the world's sight, and yet you're not happy. It's meaningless. It's chasing after wind. It doesn't give you peace because God intended it that way in a sin-filled world. Because there's an emptiness inside of you that only He can fill. It's a God-shaped void that can only be filled with Himself. And we have to understand that we are not made for this world, not this sinful world that we live in. We're never going to be really, truly happy here. In John chapter 17, verse 13 and 14, Jesus puts it this way as He's praying to the Father. He says, I'm coming to you now, but I say these things while I'm still with the world, while I'm still in the world, so that they may have full measure of my joy within them. Do you not want that joy? You want the full measure of Christ's joy within you? He says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, but they are not of this world any more than I'm of this world. If you're a Christian, if you're a child of God, you're never going to be satisfied here. You're not. You're not of this world. You are not meant for this world. It seems like that the things you believe is in direct contradiction to the world. The direction you're trying to walk in your life is the exact opposite direction of the way the world's walking. As a matter of fact, I have a book upon one of these shelves before my wife took it down and put up all of her Christmas decorations. It's called If the World Fits, You're the Wrong Size. And I think that's true. If the world fits, then we're the wrong size. If we fit really well into this world, then something's wrong with us. At least something's wrong with our Christian life. You see, this world creates in us a longing for justice, a longing for fairness, a longing for love, and a longing for peace. And guess what? I don't care if you just elected a brand new Supreme Court justice. Justice is never going to be found in this world. Neither is love. Not real love, not unselfish love. Neither is peace. It's not going to be found in this world. It's not there. Can you have momentary glimpses of peace? Of course you can. Can you have momentary glimpses of love? Can you have momentary glimpses of justice? Momentary glimpses of fairness? Yes. Because God gives those moments to make us long for more. We want more. You know, I have been in some great revivals in my life, and I'm not just talking about church meetings, but I'm talking about moments where God was there. I mean, I felt the presence of God. It was moments when usually it was encaptured with this awe, A-W-E, this awe of how good God was and how bad I am. And usually there was tears, or there was just, in that silence, you could just feel His presence, man. And it would be like, I could feel chills coming over my body. You know, we used to call them Holy Ghost bumps. And you could just feel them come over your body, just the presence of God being there. Man, I've seen people get saved without even a sermon. Just come into a church service and have an invitation, say, come on up, man. I know you're wanting Jesus. I had a guy pull up in my parking lot one time at the church, and he said, God told me to come here and talk to you. And I led him to the Lord that day. Just walked into the church one day because the Spirit, he said, I felt God stop me right here. I've had moments of that, but you know what, man, I wanted to stay there. I did. I wanted to stay right there and just live there and stay in that moment. But God took that moment away. He took that moment away from me because He wanted me to crave a different place. I wasn't meant for this place. I wasn't meant to stay here. Peter, James, and John one time went with Jesus up on a mountaintop. Now, we use the analogy of a mountaintop as a high, right? A great spiritual experience. And we hear people say, "Man, I was living on the mountaintop with God. Now I'm in the valley with God." And Peter, James, and John, they went up on that mountaintop. And Jesus at that time was just a man. I mean, he was God man, but he was just a man, you know? He was physically in one place at one time. And what happened is when they went up on that mountaintop, all of a sudden Jesus was transfigured. And what that means is he was glorified. He became the Jesus that's now, the glorified, holy Jesus. All the flesh was stripped away, and the disciples got to see him. Peter, James, John got to see him for who he really was, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And when they saw that, they were afraid. And then suddenly appeared with him Elijah and Moses. And so they were there with Jesus. Could you imagine, man, being there and all of a sudden seeing Elijah and Moses and Jesus? I thought I had chill bumps. Could you imagine what they were feeling? The electricity, the chemistry, the unspeakable joy yet fear, the moment that blew all other moments away was occurring. And so Peter said, I don't want to ever leave this place. I don't ever want to leave here. I want us to build a tabernacle. I want us to build a building. And Jesus, let's just stay right here. Let's just stay like this. But Jesus said, no, we can't stay. And then Jesus took them down that mountain. Right then, he took them down that mountain. And if you read that story, when Jesus took them down the mountain, the very first thing they met was a demonic boy in a valley. So as soon as they come off that mountaintop experience, they come down to the valley because there's a demonic boy that the disciples have been trying to cast the demon out of him, and they couldn't do it. And so when Jesus comes down, Jesus casts the demon out of the young boy. Now, what does that represent to me? That represents, as long as we live in a sin-filled world that's ruled by demons in a valley, we're not going to be able to stay on a mountaintop. We've got to go down into the valley, and we got to take Jesus with us into that valley. Because right now in the valley of this world, in the hard times of this world, it looks like Satan is ruling and reigning. And he's whipping many of the disciples, many of the church folks. We got to take Jesus and go with Jesus into that valley. We got to follow Jesus wherever Jesus leads us to go. And Jesus is not always going to lead us to go to that mountaintop. As a matter of fact, he's going to take us off of that mountaintop, and he's going to take us into that valley. You know why? Because you're not made for this world. You're not made for this world. This world only creates in you a desire for another place, another world, another home that's not here. And so you're never going to be satisfied with this world that we now live in. You see, what we really crave is home. We crave that place where there is no more tears. There are no more tears. There are no more sorrow, no more sickness, no more death. We crave that. We crave a place where there are no demonic rulers. We crave a place where we don't have to vote for a president, but we actually have God as our king. We crave a place where there's always mercy and grace and love abounds. We crave a place where mom and dad are always there, where our brothers and sisters are always with us, where our babies are always with us, where we're family together, and where we have this home that's full of love and grace and mercy and forgiveness, and we crave that so much. Romans 8:22 puts it this way. It says, we know that the whole creation has been groaning as in pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, we have the first fruits of the Spirit. We groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption, the sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what is already seen? But we hope for what we do not yet have. and we wait for it patiently. What's he saying? He's saying, man, we've been groaning. This whole world's been groaning. It's looking for something that's simply not here. And we're awaiting that day when we will be adopted into the sonship and the redemption of our bodies. That is our hope. We don't oftentimes see it. But if we don't see it, then that's okay, because who hopes for what we already have? The hope that's in us is for what's going to come. And that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me preaching. That's what keeps me serving God. That's what keeps me ministering, is that hope that one day God's going to set all things right and one day I'm going to be at home. You see, peace is what we need, and it cannot be found in this world. There comes a time when we realize it. There comes a time, Solomon realized it. I can't get it. I'll never get it here. It's elusive. It's like chasing after the wind. It's always just out of my grasp. You know, even I think if you were raised in a dysfunctional home, maybe you didn't have a father, or maybe it was an abusive father, you knew what a real father was like, kind of, right? I mean, there was this image of how you wish that daddy would hold you, how you wish that daddy would be proud of you, how you wish that daddy would just sweep you up in his arms and just hug you and say, it's going to be okay and you're safe as long as you're with me. I'm 58 years old. Man, I crave that. Don't you? I think you can be 80 or 90 years old. In the world's eyes, you're an old man. You're an old woman. Not in God's eyes. You're just a baby. In light of eternity, you're just a baby. And God wants and awaits that day where you can sit in daddy's lap. You see, there is a home that we crave. There is a home that's there. It's built in us to want and desire that home. And God plants that in us. And so that's going to come. It's just a matter of time. You know, any desire that is unfulfilled on earth is a desire that's going to be fulfilled in some form in heaven. I believe that. Any natural desire that we have that's unfulfilled here is because it's an indicator that it's out there. It's real. And that one day we'll achieve it. We'll get it. You know, people who wrap themselves up in sex, for example, what are they really looking for? Love? Really looking to be held? Right? And even though we try sinful means to get these things, doesn't mean that there's not an inner need for those things that one day will be met. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13 through 16 says this. It says, all these people were living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. In other words, I'm going to kind of paraphrase this in my words. Instead, they were longing for home, a heavenly home. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their daddy, because their daddy has a home for them. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors, says this. He says, we all know, I suspect, what it feels like to be exiles, to long for a home where we know we belong. We sense sometimes deep in our truest selves that we most authentically are meant for somewhere else. He also goes on to say, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. John Bloom, co-founder of Desiring God, you can look that up. It's a web page on the internet. He says these words. He says, as a Christian, your sense of homelessness and homesickness is normal. If you've been fighting, stop. Embracing your homelessness as a disciple is to embrace freedom. If you don't burden your worldly experiences with the expectations of making them your home, their disappointments won't be so heavy, and you'll be able to lay aside the weight of cynicism. The really good news is that you are a stranger and exile. The more you realize this, the more it allows you to travel light. The cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches that weigh you down and choke your faith. But remembering that you don't have to make your own home here will lighten your load and open your spiritual airways. Don't worry. Home is up ahead. Jesus is ahead of you, preparing a home for you. And he has made this amazing and freeing promise to you that if he's preparing a place for you, a home for you, he's coming to get you, to take you home. And so that freeing promise that you're not going to always live homeless. Don't waste precious time and resources trying to make earth your home. Instead, travel as light in your expectations and your possessions, emotional and material, as possible, and seek to take as many people as you can with you to your true home. I think of the prodigal son as I end tonight. He took his inheritance from his father, left his home, went to the far country. There he spent it on wild women and partying, right? And the Bible says that he lost absolutely everything. Well, he's a young man. He can make it back up. But the problem was the depression came. There was no jobs to be found. Couldn't work. Therefore, he ended up hooking himself up with a pig farmer, Jewish boy with a pig farmer. Jesus made sure to point out he was a pig farmer because Jews and pigs, that's just not kosher, right? So he's working with this pig farmer, and he's so hungry that he begins to eat the slop the pigs are eating. But the problem with eating that slop was there's husk in that slop. Pigs can digest that husk, but humans can't. And so as he began to eat that slop, the husk he could not digest, and he couldn't even eat that. And he was so hungry. And then he walks over to maybe a watering trough. I don't know. But somehow the Bible just simply says he came to himself. And he walks over, and I can imagine him seeing his reflection. Maybe he's dirty and muddy and stinking. And he looks down, he sees his reflection. He thinks, man, my father at home, his servants eat better than this and live better than this. And yet here I am, eating from a feeding trough of pigs. I'm going to go home to my father. And you know the story. He goes home. You see, that far country in him and living where he lived eventually brought him to a place to realize that nothing else satisfies like being home. Are you ready to come home? Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I am what you're hungry for. Jesus says, I am the living water. He who drinks of me will never thirst. Are you hungry and thirsty? Maybe you're looking in all the wrong places. Maybe you need to look for Jesus. And I invite you tonight to recommit yourself, if you're a child of God, to recommit yourself to following Christ, to fearing God and following after what he says do. And tonight, if you've never committed your life to Christ, you can, because that's the beginning of finding what you were looking for. Simply pray a prayer, get by yourself, and invite Christ into your life, and accept the fact that he loves you, and that he went to the cross, and that he died for you, and that he rose again, proving that he was who he said he was, the Son of God. He's willing to listen to you tonight. Just pray and invite him into your heart and into your life. Like I said, I hope this is the last time in a long time that I'll be doing a Bible study from this place, from this desk. But I've enjoyed being with you. I appreciate so many of you who've given generously of your finances to our church, even if you haven't attended there. We've so badly needed it as we're moving toward our church reopening. And so I thank you so much for your faithfulness in giving. It could not have been possible to be able to meet back again had it not been for you. And so we thank you so much. And I do want to invite you out. I want to invite you to come and eat with us next Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, and then we'll have a Bible study live at the table. Unfortunately, our internet there is not very good, so we can't really probably broadcast the Wednesday night Bible study. We'll try it, but probably can't. But we'd like to invite you to come out there with us live, be with us, enjoy us, be a part of a family, a community. Come out Wednesday night, 6 o'clock, eat with us, and have the Bible study. And this Sunday morning, set your clocks back and then come and join us at Victory Baptist Church, 275 A Barfield Road, Henning, Tennessee, right outside of Covington. Come out and join with us, and we're going to be having the praise team devoted. They're going to be leading us in our praise, and I'll guarantee you, if you come, you're going to enjoy it. You're going to be blessed. You're going to feel the Spirit of God. Also, one more thing, see you Saturday night, 5 o'clock. We'll be having our trunk or treat. Hope to see you there. God bless you, and you have an awesome, awesome, God-filled, blessed night.